Hello, welcome to what I'm calling the Non-Dual Lectionary. And I want to start in this first session by talking a little bit about what I mean for this project, what I plan to do, and why we're doing it. This, if we're successful, is going to be weekly short YouTube videos with that week's lectionary gospel lesson, and then a short 3 to 5 minutes or so, maybe up to 10, discussion about some of the non-dual nuggets that are buried within there. Now, who would this be for? It's really people exploring meditative or contemplative practice who want to relate it to the Christian context, either because that's home for them, because that's their background, because they live in a Christian or Western culture, or for any other reason. It could be for people who consider themselves Christian, and either from frustration or a sense of something more out there, or again, any other impetus, want to explore really what I think of as the edges of what that can mean. And the background here, the basis that I'm building off of, is that Jesus, as expressed through the Gospels, manifested what we would call non-dual realization. We might think of that as centerless, oneness, no self, unity with ground. All these words and phrases get used by different teachers to describe something that's really, it's not even an experience. It's a more like an identity. That realization can be both that kind of no self peeking through in experiences and what we might call transcendent experiences or mystical experiences, and then the stable recognition that's sort of adopting that as identity, or recognizing it as identity and living out of that. My thesis here is that Jesus talked about and interpreted that realization through the context of the Hebrew scriptures at the time. And those that came after him wrote about it with that background and then that then current cultural context. And in that context, then some things he said that expressed his realization were difficult to communicate, are misunderstood, even heretical. The phrase that a lot of people go back to, I and the Father are one. Now, that's not heretical now because we've called Jesus the unique Son of God. And so that makes him and the Father being one in the Trinity and all of that not heretical. But that, as a statement from me or from you, would be heretical then, and it remains so today even. Alan Watts talked about this and said, in a Hindu context, in a Hindu culture, someone saying that, it wouldn't be that big a deal. He says, people would respond and say, oh, good, you realize that too. But in this context, in the Hebrew context, and even to now today in what we call the Christian context, that statement, I and the Father are one, unless you're the unique Son of God, that's heresy. Now, again, for Jesus now, we say it's no longer heretical, right? Because when Jesus says them, he's that unique member of the Trinity, the unique Son of God. But I propose that sets up a new barrier, that Jesus can't be a model for us anymore, right? Instead, he's someone to believe in or worship separate from us, different from us. But Jesus himself, again, I'm going to propose, is actually expressing a non-dual recognition, realization, experiences peeking through of that along the way that we can all experience ourselves, and that at core is who we really are as well, what our true self, our true identity, our true recognition of what really is. If that's true, then the Gospels do have deep non-dual wisdom for us to follow and for us to manifest ourselves, and not just to believe in. And so this project then, going through the lectionary, is about teasing out some of those things. The Eastern traditions, I think, more directly convey the teaching. And again, we could refer to all sorts of the non-dual teachers from the East, but really more a direct, instructing on a way to get there. Now, Jesus taught also, and some people, especially some parts of the Gospel of John or any of the Gospel of Thomas, but more so the Gospels showing both teaching and living. In a sense, that's like the Bodhisattva vow now, right? Seeking to liberate others both finally and every day. And when I say every day, I mean like liberate others from poverty, liberate others from the oppressive systems that were in place at the time, all of that. So, we often think of the Bodhisattva vow in the Buddhist context as just trying to enlighten other beings, right? An enlightened being who remains in the cycle of rebirth for the purpose of enlightening all other beings. But I'd suggest liberation more broadly here is what Jesus is doing and speaking. But that's all along the way to that final enlightenment as well. But if the Eastern traditions are sort of a more direct teaching, one might ask, why is this useful at all, right? Why go through the Christian lectionary? And yeah, again, I think a lot of the Eastern teachers and traditions do convey this more clearly, but at the same time, that also has its own cultural context with its own baggage, its own customs. And I, for one, growing up and living in the West, I got a download of the Judeo-Christian context, and I think many other people did as well. So that unfamiliarity from different cultural contexts, different background, can be helpful in some ways, right? It can shake us out of what we're used to, but it can also present its own problems, and we can confuse sort of that cultural context for more enduring or universal truth that it might not actually be. There are other people doing this kind of thing out there. I'd point to Adyashanti, who wrote a book called Resurrecting Jesus. Cynthia Bourgeot wrote a book called Wisdom Jesus. Marshall Davis has written and has a YouTube channel where he's talking about enlightenment experiences and non-dual approaches to the Bible. What's going to be different about this, I think, is following the lectionary, which if you've been a churchgoer at all, you know that there's a gospel reading each Sunday. And I'm going to use a common lectionary that goes through 3 years, a 3-year cycle, really Matthew, Mark, and Luke as each of the Gospels. It matches the sermon topics for many, especially Protestant churches each week. So I'm recording this in November of 2024. The year 3 of the year C of the lectionary is about to begin in December with Advent, and that's going to focus on the Gospel of Luke. If we do the whole thing then over the course of 3 years, we'll start to see a lot of the different terrain, and we'll get through the 3 major Gospels. I'm not intending to teach non-dual recognition through this. There are others out there, like I said, doing that. For me in particular, I found really useful Adyashanti, Ramana Maharshi, Sam Harris, and the Waking Up app, I think is a huge, wonderful benefit and a resource for people to use. James Finley has been a great teacher, Thomas Keating. So those are people I would direct others to for a real kind of download and direct teaching of non-dual, no self recognition experience along the way. What I hope to do is more bringing out some of the nuggets in the Gospels, to recognize those little experiences, those sparks, and then integrate that back in to what we might understand Christian teaching and the Gospels, and what we can integrate today, regardless of that background. Some are obvious, at least to me, I think, as pure a non-dual teaching as you'd find in any wisdom tradition. Others, not so much. They may not be writing or transmitting that realization directly at all at that point. Of course, again, the people writing before Jesus, the people writing after Jesus, they may not have that recognition themselves. But if non-dual means something, it means everything belongs, right? And so we'll see what we can make of it along the way. So I'd welcome you to share your experience in the comments. Send me a message if there's anything that you're interested in, or anything you think is unclear for me, or anything that I can be helpful with along the way. Looking forward to doing this. Again, if we do the whole thing, it'll be 3 years, and we're just about to get started. But I think in looking even just at a few things myself, I think there's some useful and interesting things, especially if, like me, you grew up in that Christian context, that we can see, oh yeah, even if you've gone to other teachers and explored some things and maybe had some realization yourself, started to recognize some deeper truths that, oh yeah, some of these truths are there all along in the Christian tradition as well.